I was like,
if this is feeling overwhelming to you, like it probably is. There's a lot that goes into it, but
expert at their own venue, so they're going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs. Cheers! This is The Guide Gals, a modern wedding-focused podcast by the experts at Here Comes the Guide. I'm Chelsea, a designer and inspired creative who's probably racked up over 2,500 hours on Pinterest and the friend who's going to shoot it to you straight.
And I'm Caroline, a social media manager who is obsessed with dogs as ring bearers and will inevitably cry over your wedding video. We've seen it from all sides. We've been brides, planners, bridesmaids, and I've worked with standout brands throughout the industry.
Think of us as an extension of your wedding party and hang out with us as we share the ins, outs, ups, and downs of the road to I Do. Hey everybody, we're so excited to be here with you today to talk about choosing your wedding venue.
And before we even jump in, we do need to acknowledge our backgrounds because we are in our home setups right now. I'm in my home setup with a caramel coconut latte. Chelsea, what do you have?
I am drinking a vanilla sweet cream Starbucks cold brew. It's my typical order.
I made mine at home today because I thought that would be great. It's just not doing it, which is fine, but I added this fun straw just as a little something.
Mine is very watered down at this point. Still good, not ideal. Yes, we are in our home setups. It's the first episode that we are filming in our home setup, so super excited about that. But actually, Caroline and I being together is a bit of a rarity. Here Comes the Guide. The company we work for is fully distributed, so we are completely remote all across the country, and Caroline and I actually live in different states. So we're usually in two separate places.
But since you also mentioned Here Comes the Guide, I feel like that's another thing we should chat about really quick. So we work for Here Comes the Guide, which is amazing and super fun. And if you haven't heard about Here Comes the Guide before, we want to tell you a little bit about us. We list thousands of wedding venues from all over the U.S., so we absolutely get how overwhelming it can be to find the one. And we do believe a lot of things in the wedding planning process can be optional, but your venue is not one of them. You want an event space that not only fits your budget and your guest count, but also your style. So we have lots of things to talk about with that today.
Right. And, where your special day takes place is a huge piece of your puzzle, your wedding planning puzzle. So yeah, we've separated it out into 10 tips for you. So we're going to go ahead and break that down. So our first tip for you is to start your search early. So just like anything else, wedding venues book up and they are only able to accommodate a certain number of weddings every year. And, people plan weddings super far in advance and venues book up super far in advance. So you definitely don't want to fall in love with a venue just to figure out that they can't accommodate the date that you have in mind or even your time frame. So if you already have a ballpark time of year in mind, and, especially if you have a certain date in mind, make sure that you schedule those tours super early as possible and start looking.
Yeah. So you really do want to keep in mind if you're planning in a pinch or if you have a lot of flexibility, because that can drastically affect your venue's availability or where you end up getting married. So for me, for example, I was absolutely in love with where my parents got married. They got married at this really historic, beautiful chapel. That was my dream. So right after I got engaged, I reached out to them and I had a lot of flexibility in my planning process, but my then fiance, now husband at the time, we didn't want to wait super long. So we just asked for their availability. They had one date that was basically like 4.5, almost 5 months out, or like a year plus. So we decided to go with a shorter time frame because that's what we were able to work with. So definitely a good thing to think about. Are you planning in a pinch? Do you have flexibility? Either way, it's going to affect your process.
Definitely.
All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about, tip number 2, is location, location, location. Obviously, a lot to consider when you're planning your wedding and deciding where you want to tie the knot. So you don't want to forget, though, that your guests are also going to have to jump through some hoops to get there. So some things to think about are how close is the venue from the nearest airport? Is it easy to get to or off the beaten path? Or even is it accessible for people with disabilities?
Right. And weekday weddings are becoming so much more popular, especially Friday weddings. Yeah. So that's something to think about too. If, you have guests that are going to be potentially working on the day that you are getting married, you're going to want to make sure that, where it's located, they're able to get there on time, or be okay with the fact that that certain guests might end up missing your actual ceremony and they might only be able to attend the reception. So just keep that in mind with traffic and everything too. Location definitely matters.
It matters. And wherever you decide to get married, just make sure you're communicating those pieces with your guests. Because like I said, if it is off the beaten path, let them know if there's specific details, if there's a certain turn that they want to look out for when they're on their way. Keeping your guests keyed in on those details is going to make it easier, not only for your guests, but for you.
Yeah. And then tip number 3 that we have for you is to enlist the help of a wedding planner. So wedding planners are experts in the venues in their area. So if you're hiring someone that works in the area often that you're getting married, they're likely going to have worked at least one venue at the venue that you end up choosing. So, they're a great resource when it comes to picking the venue that's right for you, knowing what kind of guest count and styles different venues can accommodate. They're definitely an awesome resource when it comes to that.
But if you decide you're going to be planning your wedding on your own, one thing that you could look for in a venue is an on-site coordinator, or especially like a day of coordinator, because that person will also know a lot of those details and be able to help the timeline of your wedding day go smoothly. So if you can find one of those, if you're planning on your own, still get a day of coordinator.
Right. And obviously the day of coordinator are going to be an expert at their own venue. So they're going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs of how the day will run. But one thing that you're going to want to be super clear on is understanding what their responsibilities are. So an on-site coordinator is not a planner. That's just something to remember. And they are not going to be able to do as much for you as a planner would. They're going to be super helpful. And I mean, that's their job and they love doing that. But you need to be clear on exactly what they will help you with. And, don't get wrapped up in thinking that they can do everything for you, because they definitely can't.
Right. Yes. Okay. Tip number 4 is to consider your guest count. So by the time you begin your venue search, typically you have a rough idea of how many people you want to invite. But if you don't, now is a good time to try and figure that a little bit more, especially because a lot of venues require a deposit, and that's determined off of your estimated guest count. So size definitely matters when it comes to venues.
Yeah. And you want to keep the Goldilocks theory in mind here. So if, you're trying to fit 200 guests into a smaller venue, keep in mind how that is going to, make like the space and atmosphere feel. If you're trying to squeeze a bunch of people in, even if your venue says that you can accommodate it, it might end up feeling cramped and, over full, and it just might create like a bit of a stuffy feeling. And then on the other end of that, if you want your wedding to have like a cozy and intimate feel, but the space that you end up choosing is like really sprawling and has lots of like wide open, just lots of space, it might make things feel a little bit more cold, and you might not have that intimate like togetherness, close-knit feel that you're looking for. So just keep that in mind. Look and feel definitely matters, and when it comes to size, it's going to make a huge difference.
For sure.
All right. So tip number 5 is going to be to understand the big picture budget. So a wedding venue is going to be a thing that takes up a decent chunk of your budget. So compared to other things on your list, this is going to have a bigger price tag. And unfortunately, venue rental costs aren't always super clear and simple, and they definitely vary by location. So some venue packages might have a more all-inclusive feel, and some will have like more of an a la carte kind of situation. So you might run into separate fees. And some examples can include ceremony, room rental, tables, chairs, linens, drinkware, dinnerware, parking, insurance, a cake cutting fee, corkage, additional hours. The list can go on from there as well. You'll also expect to see taxes, gratuities, and service charges tacked on. So we know that this can be a bit overwhelming in the total bill. You don't want it to come as a surprise. So it's best to confirm what that big picture budget is before you do any booking. Because like I said, every venue is different. You'll want to make sure that you know exactly what's included so that there aren't any like big surprises when it comes to the total bill.
If this is feeling overwhelming to you, like it probably is. There's a lot that goes into it, but listen to our first episode if you haven't already. We go over everything you need to know about how to budget your wedding from the top to the bottom. It's a really big deep dive, and we provide some resources for you to take home afterwards. So I might be biased, but definitely go check that out. I think it's super helpful. Also on Here Comes the Guide, we have a huge list of venues that come with deals and discounts. So you can search specifically by deals and discounts in your region, your area. So you might find your dream venue on there and it comes with a discount of some sort or a complimentary honeymoon suite. Whatever it is, definitely recommend that you check it out. Okay, so tip number 6 is to determine your wedding style. If you don't have a rough idea of that yet, you'll probably want to step back and ask yourself a couple of questions. These may not seem like the questions you would ask yourself. You'll see where we're going in a second. Will it be formal or casual, indoors, outdoors, ultra modern, free-spirited, or boho? Will it be held at night, during the day? Are kids allowed? Is it adult only? These are just a few of the questions you should maybe start with.
Yeah, and by sitting down and taking the time to identify your wedding style before you even start your venue search, this will end up narrowing down that list a lot for you. So if you're looking for something with like a really luxury feel, there's obviously going to be a certain category of venues that are going to fit that style and some that absolutely will not. Mm-hmm. And like if you want to get married on the beach, that's going to narrow things down as well. So yeah, and it'll help a lot of things really fall into place.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing that I wanted to touch on was just that your style is not just the way things look, but it's how it feels too. And so finding a venue that feels like your style is really important. If you want that feel of an intimate garden party, then you're going to want to find a place that has a beautiful garden space. So determining that wedding style is really important.
And I even think that this will help you determine other planning things as well. Obviously decor would be a big part of it, but like even like what you want your dress to look like, you know, like what your color scheme will be, different things like that. I think, you know, determining that style right off the bat and then finding a venue that fits it will really help just get the ball rolling.
Absolutely.
Okay, Tip number 7 that we have for you is to prioritize your must-haves. So before you make any final decisions on your wedding venue, you want to think about the things that you consider to be non-negotiables for your special day. So some examples might be being able to get ready at your actual venue, so them having an on-site getting ready suite. If there is a certain caterer, for example, that you have your heart set on working with, you want to make sure that the venue that you choose allows outside caterers. Sometimes they will have a preferred list of venues that they exclusively work with. Other things as well, like if you do, I know Caroline mentioned earlier, want a specialty cocktail, certain venues might only allow like beer, wine, champagne kind of things. So you definitely want to prioritize these things and determine what your non-negotiables are before you start getting serious about looking.
Yeah, seriously. And for me, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like my non-negotiable was getting married at the chapel that my parents got married at, and that drastically determined my timeline for planning because I knew what my non-negotiable was before I even got going into other details. So I started there first. And also as a side note, I didn't even end up getting married there because I got married during COVID. So it was funny that the non-negotiable actually had to be really negotiable, but it is going to determine a lot of other factors. So figuring that out first is really good.
Really helpful.
Yeah, it's so helpful. And that really does bring me into the next tip, which is mind the restrictions. These do kind of transition to each other really, really simply. Your venue, no matter which one you choose, because all venues are different, they're going to come with their own set of restrictions. So it's really good to have that figured out before committing to a venue. So, like you said, if you have a cocktail that we talked about, if you have your heart set on that, but they don't accommodate anything other than wine, champagne, and beer. Or if you want to have a live band, but the venue that you have doesn't either have the space to accommodate that or has like a no live music policy, then you probably don't want to get married there. And I am a sucker for dogs as ring bearers. If you want that for your wedding, but it's not a pet friendly site, then again, you might want to rethink that.
Yeah, the list can go on and on because like Caroline said, every venue is different. Every venue will have a set of restrictions. So you definitely want to make sure that you have those non-negotiables listed out. So that way those venues that have maybe one of your non-negotiables as a restriction just remove them from your list. Don't waste your time looking. Sure. Yeah. All right. Tip number 9 is to weigh the work involved. So on either end of the wedding venue spectrum, there are blank slate venues and then all inclusive venues. So a blank slate wedding is basically just that, a blank slate. It might be an empty room, an all white space, or maybe a big, an open outdoor area. So that is going to be more of a building from scratch. So something that you can decorate freely, and you will have to decorate more, bring in all of that. But it might even mean that you have to bring in like every single piece of supplies. This could include tables, chairs, like linens, a dance floor, even bathrooms that you have to bring in. I know a few people who have gotten married at like a family farm and had like a barn reception and everything. Super cool and really personal. I love that detail, like major detail. But they really did have to bring everything, like from like lights to a dance floor to like a bar setup, and even portable restrooms, like I mentioned, which are nicer than they sound. But truly you have to bring everything involved sometimes.
Yeah. But then on the opposite end of that spectrum is all-inclusive venues and all-inclusive packages, because they cover multiple services or rentals in one package price. So this could be a great option if you want an easier planning process and a shorter to-do list. But I would say maybe the con to this is that you won't be able to have a lot of say over individual details because they might work with specific vendors or have specific ways that they do things, which is great because if you don't want to have to think about it that much, you leave it in someone else's hands. So things that all-inclusive venue packages could include are things like catering, bar service, upgraded rentals, cake, extra perks like champagne toast, or a complimentary guest suite.
In making the decision on where you fall on this spectrum is going to depend on a few things. So your vision. So if you want things super custom, then maybe a blank slate is the way to go. It's also going to depend on your budget. All-inclusive venues will probably have a little bit of a bigger price tag. Just for the fact that they do include more. They're doing more for you, all in that like one package price. And it's gonna, also depend on how much time and energy that you really want to put in. And you have to be realistic about this too. So if you're going to be committing to making centerpieces for your entire reception your entire party, these things take a lot of time. So all-inclusive packages are great for someone whose heart maybe isn't in that DIY planning mode. But yeah, definitely depends on those things and something to think about.
Absolutely. And finally, wrapping up with tip number 10 is to trust your gut. Choosing the venue for your big day is a big decision. And like all big decisions, the final choice should really come down to how do you feel about it and trusting your gut. Did this venue give you those warm, fuzzy feelings? Does the staff seem super nice and well-seasoned, professional, and like genuinely excited about your big day? If you're lucky enough to have all of those pieces come together and it fits your criteria, your budget, your guest count. Great, but also make sure that you're picking the one that makes you feel the best. I had this amazing experience at a venue that I was touring with Here Comes the Guide in Pittsburgh. It's called the Gardens of Stonebridge, and Jan there had to be one of my favorite people to talk to. She gave me those warm fuzzy feelings. She said that she and her husband welcomed all of the guests that came onto their property, except for maybe 2 weddings that they couldn't attend. And you could just tell they cared so much about not only their property and the weddings that they hosted, but the people that were there. And I think that was something that gave me that feeling, even though I'm not planning a wedding right now, and it didn't matter because I wasn't choosing it. But that was one of those moments where I was like, this is what it would feel like to trust my gut in this moment.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the staff at the wedding venue is going to be part of your wedding. They're going to be interacting with you and your guests, and they're going to be part of your special day. They will be in attendance. So making sure that feels right, and you have that perfect match like Caroline did with Jan, is really important. And a pro tip that we have for you is to make sure that everything that you have been promised is in your written contract. So having everything in writing is super important. In the wedding industry, there is a lot of turnover. And since you're planning your wedding, you're likely planning your wedding so far in advance. It could be over a year before, from when you sign a contract to when your actual wedding will take place. So if you talked to Rebecca at the time of contract signing, that Rebecca might turn into Ryan, during the day of your wedding. It might be a completely new staff member there. So you want to make sure that if you were verbally promised anything, really comb through your contract, make sure that everything that you think should be there is there in writing before you sign anything and before you make the commitment.
Right. Because like you said, if Rebecca's the one giving you those warm, fuzzy feelings, that's great and all. But at the end of the day, we want you to protect your venue and make sure you get everything that you want out of your special day. So yes, trust your gut, but definitely keep this pro tip in mind.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises when it's too late to make any changes. So yeah.
Yes. So as we mentioned at the top of this episode, we work for Here Comes the Guide, and it's a great place where you can choose your wedding venue. Again, I'm biased, but I think you should check it out because our top priority really in this whole process is creating a seamless process for you to find your wedding venue, make decisions, and get things checked off of your list. And if you don't believe me, check out our About Us, our brand story, our staff bios. You can really see how much we care about you and your wedding planning process, and we want this to be easy and breezy for you. So if you want to go check out our show notes for this episode, those will be super helpful. And also check out Here Comes the Guide.
Yeah, and we are so happy to have gotten to talk to you about this today. We're obviously passionate about wedding venues and picking the perfect one, working for Here Comes the Guide. So we hope this has been helpful to you. We have a lot more coming, lots of episodes. We'll be talking a lot about planning, lots of the planning aspects, from every end of it. And then we're going to talk about wedding trends and so much more too. So we're super excited for the future episodes that we have planned. So stay tuned for those. Yeah. Really excited.
I think that's all for now.
Yeah, I think that's all we have for you today.
But it's been so fun, and I actually am super excited for next episode in particular. So we will catch you then. All right. With my caramel coconut latte.
Yeah, melted cold brew.
Cheers.
Cheers.